Okay, and we're starting. We're in our dream series. Let me make sure there's sound. We have sound? Okay, great. We are in our dream series where we talk about visions and dreams from God. Um, last time we spoke on, or we went over Genesis chapter 40. Today we'll be in Genesis chapter 41. And we're still talking about Joseph's dreams and Joseph's promotions. We also covered last time that dreams and visions are basically the same. Typically, an individual has one or the other um, more often. So personally, I get visions more than dreams. Other people get dreams more than visions. Uh, in essence, they're basically the same. You're seeing a movie play out, something similar to a movie play out in your head. The major difference is dreams happen when you're sleeping. A vision comes when you're awake. So we'll read Genesis chapter 41 from the Bible today. And before we get started with the reading, two things. I want to make sure you pay attention to the dreams and visions we get. A lot of times, not all times, but a lot of times they are messages from the Lord to tell us or to show or tell us what's coming in the future in our lives. Sometimes they tell us possibilities that will come in the future that are from the Lord, and we have to act on those dreams and visions and possibilities. The second thing is a book by Stephanie Ik. I wrote this down in my notes. It's called The Power of Your Dreams. The Power of Your Dreams. I've just finished the book probably last week. It took me a day or two to read through it. It wasn't long at all. I think it was somewhere around, it might have been less than 200 pages. I read it on my Kindle. Um, so it wasn't very long at all. But I will say this. It was very informative for those of you who don't like reading big books. This was a good one for you, or you can get it on audiobook. But Stephanie Ik, the the way you the spelling of the last name is Ike on the book. But she does a great job of talking about dreams and visions. She gets down to the details on symbolism in dreams, colors, who's in the dream, what's in the dream. She even gets down to the nitty gritty of telling you how to walk out particular dreams, or even tell somebody else about a dream they're having, or excuse me, that's not how I wanted to say it, or reveal the the information or the revelation you get from the dream to someone else, because sometimes we get dreams or visions about someone else that's for someone else and it's not for us. But the way we relay that message, or um, tell someone the timing of that information is critical. So that's something you should think about getting if you're interested in hearing more about dreams. So let's get to the scripture now. It's Genesis chapter 41, Genesis chapter 41, and we'll read. I'm reading from the New Living Translation, and it goes as follows. 2 full years later, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing on the bank of the Nile River. In his dream, he saw 7 fat, healthy cows come up out of the river and begin grazing in the marsh grass. Then he saw 7 more cows come up behind from the Nile, but these were scrawny and thin. These cows stood beside the fat cows on the riverbank. Then the scrawny, thin cows ate the 7 healthy, fat cows. At this point in the dream, Pharaoh woke up. But he fell asleep again and had a second dream. A second dream. This time he saw 7 heads of grain, plump and beautiful, growing on a single stalk. Then 7 more heads of grain appeared, but these were shriveled and withered by the east wind. And these thin headed swallowed up the 7 plump, well formed heads. Then Pharaoh woke up again and realized it was a dream. The next morning, Pharaoh was very disturbed by the dreams, so he called for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. When Pharaoh told them his dreams, not one of them could tell him what they meant. Finally, the king's chief cupbearer spoke up. Today I've been reminded of my failure, he told Pharaoh. Some time ago, you were angry with the chief baker and me, and you imprisoned us in the palace of the captain of the bodyguard. One night, the chief baker and I had a dream, and each dream had its own meaning. There was a young Hebrew man with us in prison who was a slave of the captain of the bodyguard. We told him our dreams, and he told us what each of our dreams meant. For everything happened just as he had predicted. It was restored. I was restored to my position as cupbearer, and the chief baker was executed and impaled on a pole. Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once, and brought he was quickly brought from the prison. After he shaved and changed his clothes, he went in and stood before Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream last night, and no one here can tell me what it means. But I've heard that when you hear about a dream, you can interpret it. It is beyond my power to do this, Joseph replied. But God can tell you what it means and set you at ease. So Pharaoh told Joseph his dream. In my dream, he said, I was standing on the bank of the Nile River, and I saw seven fat, healthy cows come up over the river and begin grazing in the marsh grass. But then I saw seven sick looking cows, scrawny and thin, come up after them. I've never seen such sorry animals in all the land of Egypt. These thin, scrawny cows ate the seven fat cows, but afterwards you wouldn't have known it, for they were still as thin and scrawny as before. Then I woke up. In my dream, I saw seven heads of grain, full and beautiful, growing on a single stalk. Then seven more heads of grain appeared, but they were blighted, shriveled, and withered by the east wind. And the shriveled heads swallowed the seven healthy heads. I told these dreams to the magicians, but no one could tell me what they mean. Joseph responded, both Pharaoh's dreams mean the same. God is telling Pharaoh in advance what he is about to do. The seven healthy cows and the seven healthy heads of grain both represent 7 years of prosperity. The seven thin, scrawny cows that came up later and the seven thin heads of grain withered by the east wind represented 7 years of famine. This will happen just as I had described it, for God has revealed to Pharaoh in advance what he is about to do. The next 7 years will be a period of great prosperity throughout the land of Egypt, but afterwards will be 7 years of famine, so great that all prosperity will be forgotten in Egypt. Famine will destroy the land. This famine will be so severe that even the memory of God of the good years will be erased. As for having two similar dreams, it meant that these events have been decreed by God, and he will soon make them happen. Therefore, Pharaoh should find an intelligent and wise man and put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh should appoint supervisors over the land and let them collect 1/5 of the crops during the 7 good years. Have them gather all the food produced in the good years that are just ahead and bring it to Pharaoh's storehouses. Store it away and guard it so there will be food in cities. That way, there will be enough to eat in 7 years of famine to come to the land. Otherwise, the famine will destroy the land. Verse 37, Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his officials. So Pharaoh asked his officials, can we find anyone else like him, like this man, so obviously filled with the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a rank higher than yours. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt. The pharaohs removed the signet ring from his hand and placed it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in fine linen clothing and hung a gold chain around his neck. Then he had Joseph ride in chariot reserved for his second in command. And wherever Joseph went, the command was shouted, kneel down. So Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of all Egypt. And Pharaoh said to him, I am Pharaoh, but no one will lift a hand or foot in the entire land of Egypt without your approval. Wow, what a chapter. Now there's a few more verses, but we won't get to those. We'll stop there. But what a chapter. Now, when I was in my notes or taking notes this year during my study, the first thing I noticed was that Joseph was promoted by God. Okay, that's the first thing I noticed. The second thing was Joseph is promoted after pain. And the third thing was Joseph is promoted through someone he helped 2 years ago. So the good we do returns. Let's go over that again. Joseph is promoted by God. That's number one. Joseph is promoted after he experienced a massive amount of pain. And then the third thing is Joseph was promoted by way of someone he helped in the past, coming back and doing him a quote unquote solid, as we might say. So, number one is that Joseph is promoted by God, and that's how all our promotions occur. Our promotions don't come by way of, they really don't come by way of a family member or a friend. They really don't come by way of a supervisor on a job. They at the at the base level, the ultimate level is what I'm saying. At the root of everything, our promotions come by God. You can have all the educations you want all the degrees. You can have all the relationships, the social relationships, uh, et cetera, et cetera. You will not get promoted unless God allows that. Okay. We're talking about career wise. You will not get promoted unless God allows that. The second thing we see is that after a massive amount of pain, Joseph is promoted. So he has fights with his siblings that almost kill him and send him into slavery. Then he um, is lied upon by Potiphar's wife. If you recall that, we went over that last time. That was in Genesis chapter 40. So he's lied on by Potiphar's wife, and more pain. Then he's put in jail, in prison, after being lied on by Potiphar's wife. More pain, and he's in the prison for several years. And then finally, he's promoted into a place of being a ruler in Egypt, basically the second in command, underneath the king or the Pharaoh of the land. Okay. And by the way, Pharaoh was the term for the king in Egypt, in Africa. And Pharaoh, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, Pharaoh, the term Pharaoh actually means, the etymology of the word means great house, great house. So that's where we get those names and meanings from scripture. So number one, let's go over them again. You have Joseph being promoted by God. Number two, you have Joseph being promoted after great pain. And number three, we see that Joseph is promoted after he does something good for someone. Okay. If you remember, he helped the cupbearer and the baker. Last time we talked about Joseph helping the cupbearer and the baker by analyzing their dreams and giving them revelation. Okay. So 2 years later, this gentleman comes back and, as we say in slang, does Joseph a solid. And he tells the Pharaoh or the king that Joseph has this ability to really interpret and relay the message of dreams or visions that people have. All right. That's the first few things I noticed after reading this chapter. We also come to find, for those of you who are into words and the meaning of words like me, that Joseph's name means increase. So every time Joseph heard his name, whether he was a slave or in his father's house or in the prison, he heard increase. Joseph's name literally means increase. So names are very, very important. Still today, in the modern day, names are very, very important. You should find out the meaning of your name, your first name, your middle name, your last name, because they hold, typically they hold some sort of prophecy about you and your life and where you're going. Okay. The second thing I wrote down in my notes was Joseph had a plan for scarcity. Joseph had a plan for scarcity. So in the dream that or the revelation he received from God about the Pharaoh's dream, after giving the revelation, he created a plan for how to maintain. How would I say this? The funds or the abundance that the king was given. So if you recall in the story, the king says he has two dreams and he couldn't figure them out. He even went to the mighty men or the scholars or the interpreters in Egypt, and they could not give him an adequate understanding or revelation of his dream. Joseph could. He was able to do that because he was given revelation by God. So once he gave once Joseph gave Pharaoh the interpretation or the revelation of his dream, which was you're going to have 7 years of abundance, plenty, and then you're going to have 7 years of famine. Okay. Once he gave him the revelation of the dream, he was able to go down to the details of the dream and give the Pharaoh a plan, a good plan on how to be resourceful during this 14-year period. And Joseph's plan was to save 20%. Okay. Now, that's an effective plan that we can still use today in our lives. If you can save 15 or 20% of your income, great. If you can only save 10 at this point, that's fine too. Okay. That revelation was given by God, and it can still be used this in the modern day, in the modern time, with our basic how do I say, with our basic income that we receive on a monthly basis or on a 2-week basis or on a daily basis for some of us. Okay. Now I want to extend that and give more revelation. If you can save 15 or 20% of your income, great. Now I like to also add, if you can save, or excuse me, invest 10 or 15% of your income, that's great too. So let's say for an average person, if you can save 15% of your income that you receive on a monthly basis, and you can invest 10 to 15% of your income that you receive on a monthly basis, that's typically 20 to 30% of your income that goes to savings and investments. Okay. That means you can live on the other 70 to 80% of your income. That's having fun, going out to eat, paying your rent or mortgage, et cetera, et cetera. That's a great plan. And I think it's something that we can definitely still use today. The next thing we can gain from the scripture here is I want to go back to Genesis 41, verse 4 and verse 8. And I'll read those really quickly. Verse 4 says, "Then the scrawny, thin cows ate the 7 healthy, fat cows." Okay. At this point in the dream, Pharaoh woke up. Verse 8, "The next morning, Pharaoh was very disturbed by the dreams. So he called for all the magicians and wise men in Egypt. When Pharaoh told them his dreams, not one of them could tell him what they meant." Joseph goes on to say, or increase. Remember, Joseph's name means increase, and that's what eventually happened in his life, great increase. But Joseph went on to tell him that there were 2 dreams that Pharaoh received in one night, and the dreams were one and the same. Remember in the previous chapter, there were 2 dreams that Joseph had to interpret. One dream came from the cupbearer, one dream came from the baker, and they were both dejected. Years later, more than 2 years later, Pharaoh comes to Joseph with 2 dreams he had in the same night, just like the cupbearer and the baker had 2 dreams in the same night, and he interprets it. And he tells the Pharaoh, hey, your 2 dreams are one and the same. And in essence, he tells Pharaoh that these dreams are or revelation is coming from God, it's ordained by God, and it's going to happen in the future. And it'll happen, or it'll take place very, very quickly. Okay. So another factual and good interpretation by Joseph that proves to be true. The next thing we should focus on when we look at this dream is that Pharaoh was smart and wise enough to know that not only did Joseph have the correct and proper interpretation, okay, he was also wise enough to know that Joseph had gifts, and this is a man that I should put in charge of the country to make decisions, okay? Pharaoh didn't get insecure. Pharaoh didn't hate. Pharaoh wasn't jealous. He wasn't envious of Joseph's gifts. No, he brought, this is good for all the business owners and nonprofit leaders and government leaders that are listening. When Pharaoh saw how well Joseph deciphered the dream, and when Pharaoh saw how well Joseph came up with a plan for the dream, what did Pharaoh do? He brought him into his kingdom and gave him a position of management. He made him a director, a leader in his nation, or his nation state, which is Egypt at that time. Okay. Egypt is a political power and a military power and a power in science and math in the world. Okay. Uh, at this point in time, this is thousands of years ago. And Pharaoh was wise enough to say, hey, young man, you come here and you help me lead this country because you're doing great things and you're able to discern and you're able to create a good plan and you're able to uh, administrate. Okay. So he did a good job here. Um, and we also have to say the Pharaoh had a great deal of wisdom because he wasn't even a believer. Thousands of years ago, the Pharaoh in Egypt or the Egyptians in total worshipped the sun. They were worshipped the Nile River. They did certain pagan practices. They had magicians. They had soothsayers. They had seers, etc., etc. They also worshipped the gods Osiris, Isis, and Horus. They had slaves. There were terrible pagan practices that the Egyptians had. But with all that being said, Pharaoh was wise enough to see that this man Joseph was given ability and power and revelation by God, and he did not reject that. He accepted it. He wasn't jealous. He wasn't envious. He wasn't insecure. He gave Joseph a position. In Proverbs, I'm not saying this verbatim, but in Proverbs, the Bible says, the heart of the king is in the hands of the Lord. So God controls, God ultimately controls everything. All right. And then the last few things, and then we're out of here. And that'll take up our series of going over visions and dreams. Here's what I jotted down in my notes, the last two things. Isn't it interesting how God always put Joseph in a position of authority and status? His brothers tried to murder him, his brothers sent him into slavery. He goes to Potiphar's house, and as a slave, after years of work, he gets to the top. He's running Potiphar's house. That's the captain of the bodyguard. He gets lied on. He gets sent to prison. After years of working, he gets to the top. He's running the prison. The head of the prison puts Joseph in charge of running the prison. Isn't that interesting? How is the prisoner running the prison? Okay. And then the third and final place is the head of the country. Joseph is in charge. He's a man of status and honor and ability now. He's in charge of running the country. Okay. Pharaoh puts him in that position, or in all reality, God puts him in that position. So God it's always interesting when I read this passage on Joseph, these few chapters in the book of Genesis, that Joseph always got to a place of status and authority and power. His name's increased, and God greatly increased him throughout his life. But I think one of the reasons this occurred was because Joseph lived righteously, and he followed the Lord, and he obeyed the Lord. So I think that's a note for all of us as we walk. We might not all become prime minister or president like Joseph was, or we might not be running countries like Joseph was. But it does tell us that if we are righteous, if we follow the Lord, if we listen to the Lord, that God will increase us in our life in this modern day and in the future. That God's holy, and He wants us to live holy. So that's it.